welcome to Mike Drops the Mic. I'm Mike Lineman. Today, I have the privilege of being joined by two remarkable individuals. My first is my good friend and my first co-host, Lydia Wasserbauer. Lydia, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being on. The second person I'm very excited to be joined by today is Professor Tim Clutton-Brock. Professor is a British zoologist from the University of Cambridge, and he has spent decades of his life performing research on comparative ecology of mammals. He was also a founder of the Kalahari Meerkat Project, which was featured on the popular TV show Meerkat Manor, which I grew up on and was a huge fan of. So as a meerkat lover and a meerkat enthusiast, I'm very excited to talk to Professor Tim Clutton-Brock today. Tim, how are you doing today?
Fine, thanks. Thanks for getting in touch and having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. So I listened to a podcast with you originally, and it talked about how originally a career you had in mind was teaching British history. How did you make that career change to go and pursue zoology instead?
Well, that was, I did history up to university entrance level. But when I was 17, I went off to Africa for a year and worked in the Zambian game department in Luangwa Valley, working as a ranger's assistant mostly on foot in amazing country with some of the highest densities of heavy game in Africa. Very, very wild area, really exciting. And I came back to go to Cambridge, and basically the idea of getting stuck into British constitutional history, but between 1500 and 1830 didn't really turn me on anymore. I'd done quite a bit of it. I thought I'd do something else. So I'd asked them if they'd let me read zoology. And we specialize earlier in this country than you do. And they said, absolutely not. You've got no A levels in science. So I eventually read archaeology and anthropology, specialized in biological anthropology, and then did a PhD in zoology on primates, on colobus monkeys, and started doing science, and I've been doing it ever since.
And you also did lots of research on the red deer as well, which you studied in the Scottish island of Rum. What did you enjoy most about your research there, studying the red deer?
Well, I think the huge advantage of the red deer and the meerkats, and most of the projects I've been involved with, is that we're able to follow individual animals. So all the studies that I've been involved with, we basically learn to recognize large numbers of individuals. So it's not just one or two in a population that we can't recognize. We learn to recognize virtually all the individuals, and we then follow them through their lives. And there are an awful lot of questions in ecology and evolutionary biology that you really can't answer unless you know the course of individual life histories. So there are so many events when you start breeding, who your mother was, who your father was, and so on, that have effects that continue throughout your whole life. Yeah. And unless you follow individuals, you don't see that at all. Indeed, in some cases, you can't, it's quite difficult unless you follow individuals to identify the aging process. Because what happens is in many natural populations is that weaker or poorly developed animals die earlier. So if you look at 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds through to say 10 or 20-year-olds, you may find that actually there's not much aging effect. And that's because as you move down the lifespan, you're left with phenotypically better and better individuals. So what you need to do to look at aging, which is common in many animals, is actually to follow the trajectory of individual lifespans. But there are very many questions, whether they're about population density or whether they're about the costs and benefits of different strategies, where you basically need to know not just what the immediate consequences of events at one stage of the life history are, but what their consequences are at later stages. And I think we're just really starting to realize the extent to which your early development, your birth, your growth during gestation, your birth weight, your early development, what happens to you, who does what to you during the first quarter of your life, has effects that run right through the lifespan and commonly affect aging and aging rates at the far end. So that all those kinds of questions and questions that need data of that kind are very, very common, both in ecology and evolutionary biology. You only really can get at them if you can follow large numbers of individuals throughout their lifespan. That's what we did with the red deer. So with the red deer, we've followed, I think now somewhere approaching 4,000 individuals from birth to death. Yeah, almost all of those have been, well, all of them have been individually recognized. Well, most have been caught within a week of birth and weighed and blood sampled, so that we actually know their genotype and we know who's related to who, and we're able to investigate the effects of differences in genotype on the life history and what happens to them. We've done that with red deer, and we've done it with Sowie sheep on another island off the north of Scotland. And then in '93, I decided I'd switch. Much of the red deer work was really, they're strongly polygynous species. So one male can defend access to 10 or perhaps even 20 females, with the result that there's really strong competition between males for females, which is why males are bigger and have big ants. They're the same, they're very, very similar to your elk. You see,
okay.
So they're quite they're a big sexually dimorphic animal. And that's because they have a polygynous breeding system. So much of the work on red deer was really about the evolution of sex differences and the whole pattern of sex differences in ecology, as well as in size and development. And in '93, I thought that I needed a change. I was sort of halfway through my career. I thought I'd do something entirely different. And I'd worked throughout my life. I'd supervised and been involved with studies in Africa. And I thought I'd move to work on cooperative breeders. Cooperative breeders are species where commonly there's one breeding female in each group, commonly one male too, and then a whole slew of non-breeding individuals of both sexes who help them rear their young. And that raises lots of interesting evolutionary questions, because natural selection operates on basically the number of individuals that that adults generate into the next generation.
Sure.
In practice, into the replication of their genotypes into the next generation. And with these species, many individuals don't breed at all and help other individuals, spend their lives helping other individuals breed. So there's a real fundamental question there of why do they do it? And why hasn't selection, which should favor, you would think, breeding for themselves, why hasn't selection weeded out those species? So cooperation of that rather extreme kind raises important evolutionary questions. It also raises a whole pile of quite interesting ecological questions too. So we went to the Kalahari, started to habituate meerkat groups, found that they habituated eventually very, very well, though it was quite an effort, so that we can watch them currently at our feet. If you sit down, they'll sometimes climb on you. So we were able to do that, and we have now again probably followed in around 3,000 individuals throughout their breeding lives, and all of those have been almost all of those have been genotyped and hormonally profiled. So we know quite a lot both about their behavior and about their biology.
So what did a typical day of research when you're going to study the meerkats, what was a typical daily routine like for you? How many hours would you spend with them a day? Could you talk to me about that?
Very early stages. I mean, normally we would leave before dawn.
Mm-hmm.
And with the meerkats, when they get up, they commonly sun on the edge of the burrow. and stand up and face the sun. And they're relatively easy to see then. So when we worked at one of the study sites, when we worked, we couldn't radio track the animals, so we had to watch them. So this was in the national park, and we'd drive up and down the road trying to spot the meerkat groups. And then we'd get out of the car and go to them. And there we'd follow them for a full day at a time. So the day started once we found them, and it ended when they go to bed at dusk, and we were with them throughout the day. That's how it started, but it is blisteringly hot during in the Kalahari, and the temperatures can get up to 40 or 45 degrees. So doing those full day follows is a very wearing process. And when we, in the course of the study, as we've moved on, and we have moved to another site where we again have lots of habituated individuals, it's currently the case that most of the people working on them, because I'm based in Cambridge, I go out until COVID. I've been going out a couple of times a year.
Sure.
But as in a routine fashion, people actually normally get up before dawn, they go to the meerkat groups. Most of the meerkat groups have one or two radio-collared individuals, so they can actually identify where they are without too much difficulty. And they then spend 3 or 4 hours with the meerkat groups, recording in a routine fashion, on a check sheet fashion, who does what. And then they pack it. Oh, I suppose they weigh them when they get up. They weigh them again at the end of 3 hours, so that we can, because they're all trained now to climb onto electronic balances to get tiny rewards of crumbs of hard-boiled egg. So they spend 3 hours with them. They weigh them at the start, weigh them at the end. Then they go back and have a rest during the heat of the day for 4 or 5 hours. And then they come out again, radio track the groups again, follow them again for 3 hours, weigh them before they go to bed, and then they leave and go back to and have the evening off.
Well, I, as a fan of Meerkat Manor growing up, you know, I had my favorite meerkats. I had Shakespeare, Mozart, Flower, all of which I assume you have studied and developed personal relationships with these meerkats, considering the extensive amounts of time that you've spent with them. Another thing that I heard you talk about previously was the meerkats are so comfortable around you guys. You're actually giving an you're able to take these wild meerkats and give ultrasounds to them, which is quite remarkable. But I would like to know, did you have any personal relationships with any of the specific meerkats? Any from the show, or any that were?
Depends what you mean by personal relationships. It would mean many different things.
That's right. That's true.
But I mean, the straight thing, the immediate thing to realize is that at any one time we're working with 200 or 300 meerkats. So you remember Flower and Shakespeare and the others, but I'm working with numbers. Do you see? So I mean, yes, there are individuals, and Flower was one, that were unusually tame. Zaphod, her mate, also, who I can remember in some detail. But meerkats move through, they suffer somewhere around 20 to 25% of them get killed by predators each year.
Mm.
So most individuals move through their lives. So you can remember snatches and sort of periods of particular individuals. But with a study like that, you're actually focusing very much on the population. Even if you're recording individuals, you don't have the same sorts of relationship with individuals that you would have with a pet, with your dog or what have you. You know that individuals may well not survive long. You don't intervene when anything happens to them, because if you do, you're skewing the data that you're wanting to be not skewed. Mm-hmm. So I mean, for someone like myself, you're interested in answering questions about them rather than in developing relationships with individuals. Does that
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Me, I have my meerkat here beside me. I'm a big meerkat fan. I wish I could have personal relationships with them, but I understand what you mean when you're seeing so many of them and you're looking at the numbers, not necessarily the specifics or individuals as much. But
and I say that every meerkat has a 5-figure code, computer code, which is how everything goes into the system. But you can't have you can't, and we work with teams of a dozen people, and people don't remember computer codes like they remember names like Shakespeare and Flower and Zaphod and so on. So we give them names really so that we can talk to each other and say, oh, well, did you see Zaphod today? Or, is Flower pregnant yet? So that we don't make mistakes about the specific digits, but they all have those digits, and that's what the computer uses. But that's not what we use. And the people who work on the project, the volunteers, are allowed to give them names with some limits. So they're not allowed to name them with sort of copyright names like pop stars and things like that. They have to be careful of that. And the names can't be too suggestive.
Yes.
And they must be certainly somewhat politically correct.
I would imagine. Well, Lydia, are there any questions you would like to ask Professor Clutton-Brock?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for turning over the mic.
Absolutely.
So, Tim, I was wondering, is there any current research you're doing by yourself or with students at Cambridge?
Absolutely. I mean, we're working on many aspects of cooperation all the time. So, I mean, I spend my time. At the moment, I have 3 or 4 postdocs working on the Meerkat project, plus a couple of students. We are working on a wide variety of things. We've been, for example, most recently looking at the life history of groups. So instead of looking at the life history of individuals, we've been exploring how groups start and how long groups last for and what causes them to die out, and how the characteristics of groups affect the development of their members.
Wow, that's great.
We've equally well been looking at the way in which cooperation is divided, so that the animals feed pups, they babysit, they go on sentinel duty, and so on. And we're interested in the way in which the contributions of individuals to those behaviors are distributed. Who does what? Do we have some individuals that try and avoid doing any work and try and pick up the benefits, but don't do much themselves? Do we have hard workers and so on? And so that's another project. So that at any one time, we're probably working on, I don't know, somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen different projects, which are running through and which will be eventually published as scientific papers.
Wow, that's great. It sounds like you guys are staying busy for sure.
Very busy, yes, absolutely.
Yes. And then I also had a question. What kind of recommendations do you have for someone that's maybe looking to start into zoology? I know you said the American specialization starts at a much later age than over in the UK, but can you speak on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly not to do what I did. I mean, if you want to do biology, you need, and if you want to go through the normal process, you need to do some chemistry and some physics, and you need to do as much math as you can. All of those will be useful, particularly the math. So otherwise, what I'd say is get involved in natural history, learn about what species, learn to recognize the birds that are in your garden. And at a fairly early stage, go and volunteer to help on projects. There are lots of projects running in the States on a wide variety of different mammals and birds and insects. And many of those take on people from the age of 16 or 17 on during the summer months to work as volunteers. that kind of experience gives you exactly what you need to move ahead and to get into the field and to end up as a zoologist.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thanks for that advice. That was great advice. Mike, go ahead.
Well, I believe the last thing that we would like to do, if it's okay with you, is we do 7 quick questions at the end of the interview. Some of them might be related to meerkats, your research. Some of them might not be related at all, just some of your favorite interests. Just short answer. Is that okay with you?
Yep, sure.
All right. My first question is, what is your favorite movie?
Oh, good heavens. I don't go to, where do I think? I mean, I remember The Deer Hunter very well.
Okay.
So The Deer Hunter was a phenomenal and moving, I'm trying to think. I haven't been to a movie for 10 years, I should think.
Really?
So Shakespeare in Love would come high too.
Okay.
Okay, so my question is, if you could go back in time and meet any extinct animal, what would it be?
Probably not T-Rex. Certainly not. I think I'd quite like to meet a giant sloth.
Okay.
One of these sort of 12-foot high sloths that you got in South America.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mind equally well meeting a Megaceros, which are the giant Irish elk, which you never got them in the New World. They never got there, which is why your elk is larger than our red deer.
Okay.
But in Asia and Europe, we had these huge things that were much larger than elk or red deer, called Megaceros or giant Irish elk, which I think their antlers ended up weighing about 10, 12 kilos a side. And they grew them each year. So I think I'd like to have seen them growing their antlers.
Yeah. You've traveled all over the world, whether that's doing research or maybe on your own. And I'm curious, what's the most breathtaking or beautiful place you've traveled to?
Well, I've relatively recently been in Antarctica, which is certainly breathtaking and also very beautiful and incredibly hostile, or certainly the area that we went to was. But I think the mountains of Tanzania, of the Kilimanjaro and Meru, and running down to the crater and the plains of the Serengeti have to be about the most exciting, and the Rift Valley lakes have to be fabulously exciting. And beyond that, if I'm allowed to have a second one, the Ruwenzori and the Western Rift in Uganda, running up to the Ruwenzori, Kibale Forest and Queen Elizabeth National Park, Murchison Falls National Park, all of those, which is very, very much real untouched Africa, fantastically exciting and very beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any pets yourself?
Well, my wife and I travel, so we don't have a dog for that reason, though I grew up with dogs. Yes, we have 2 geese, which the grass down, and I think my wife is probably fonder of them than I am, and I'm very well aware that the male has every masculine fault that you can think of.
All right. My next question is, I know that you spent a lot of time in Africa seeing these meerkats. What was the scariest animal that you maybe came in close contact with, whether that's like a hyena, a lion? Did you have any scary encounters?
Not very scary encounters, not as scary as I had in Zambia when I worked there, but it's the case that when the meerkats have fantastic eyesight, absolutely amazing. So when we've initially followed them on foot in the Kalahari Meerkat Park, where there are quite a lot of lions, we weren't too worried initially because we thought, well, we shan't not see a lion. We'll have plenty of time because the meerkats will obviously alert us. But the meerkats are just not bothered about lions. They're too small for lions to be eaten by lions, and the lions don't bother them. And the result is, if they see lions, they don't alarm call or do anything like that. They just, in practice, shrug their shoulders and keep going. And of course, if you're following them, you're focused on them. And the lions are normally in the shade, so it is quite easy to walk straight into the middle of a pride of lions, which is not a very good idea. I think the scariest moment probably that I've had with lions was in Zambia when I was 18, and I came around a bush beside the Luangwa Valley when I was on foot on my own, and walked straight into 2 lionesses and half a dozen cubs about 12 foot away. And all the things you're supposed to do, I got back around that bush quite quickly.
Oh my goodness.
And
Wow.
they all went wow and rolled over and pushed off. And I was very relieved.
I would imagine.
That sounds terrifying. One more question from me. What is one thing you recommend doing or seeing while in the UK?
Ooh, depends who you are. Tower of London isn't bad.
Okay.
If you're going to London, goes back to built partly by William the Conqueror in 1066. So, plenty of there. Where else? I can think of, I think of individual places and individual sites. The Severn Bore, which is a sort of 6-foot wave that starts a spring tide and runs up the River Severn and then right down it. And people now, this sort of happens once a year, and people go and surf on it. And you can surf for miles on the Severn Bore. I think that's quite an exciting thing.
That is very cool. And my last question I have for you, Tim, is beyond your geese, beyond the red deer, and beyond the meerkats, what is your favorite animal?
My favorite animal, I think puffins have to range high. So do you know what puffins are? They're a small seabird, spends its life out at sea, just comes to land. I think they rate very highly. Otherwise, I'm a keen snorkeler and fish twitcher, and I think the butterfly fish are really some of my favorites. I've swum around various parts of the Indian Ocean. There are quite a lot of different butterfly fish, and those which are the chaetodons, I think are fabulously beautiful, and they're unusual because they live in pairs. So you see pairs of butterfly fish moving around and feeding together, and I'm pretty fond of them.
Well, thank you so much again for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you, Tim. I think I can say for myself and Lydia, we both learned a lot, and we're honored to talk to you. So,
Yes, thank you so much.
No, not at all. Nice to talk to you.
Absolute delight.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you very much, and have a good day, and good luck with the rest of your research, Professor.
Thank you. Bye now.
Goodbye.